Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. Welcome to the show. Yeah, to the show. As you're coming on in, signing on, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself in the chat, putting in your name, your role, your institution, and then optional if you do want to share one thing you hope to gain from today's session. The theme of today is all things online learning and AI. So again, go ahead, introduce yourself in the chat, and then we will get started with the conversation today. Before we do kick off, I want to just remind folks from a housekeeping perspective that the recording and the attendee certificate will be shared within the next 2 days via email, the same email you used to register. Please make sure to ask all the questions you have in the Q&A feature of Zoom, and then I'll prompt you to use the chat as we go. And if you have thoughts, if you have any sort of opinion or resource you want to share, the chat is a great place to share. Otherwise, questions in the Q&A helps me stay organized. And then I will be monitoring the Q&A, and I'll pepper them in throughout the entire session we have today. If not, I'll get to it at the end. But welcome, everyone. Again, keep introducing yourself. Great to see us from all across the country. My name is Kelsey Berenger. I'm the CEO of Packback, an instructional AI platform used to spark curiosity in our students and create stronger, more confident writers. My career started in the classroom, the high school chemistry classroom, and I joined Packback 7 years ago and really haven't looked back, clearly. I have joined with me today Ellis Reeves. I'm going to let Ellis introduce himself, but online learning extraordinaire expert. So Ellis will have the most of the microphone today. I'm just here to help get inside of that head of yours. So Ellis, you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Kelsey. Hey, everyone. My name's Ellis. I'm so excited to be here with you guys. I am from USC Aiken, which is in South Carolina, a little town called Aiken. I have been working in higher education for the last 10 years, and I have specifically had a huge portion of my career dedicated to online students, course development, and IT troubleshooting in an LMS, and integrating generative AI into the course development process. I've been very fortunate over my career since OpenAI came out with ChatGPT in 2021 to be an early integrator for generative AI into course development. And so I've had the privilege to go and talk about my experiences and share those across the country. And I'm so excited to be here with you guys today. So excited to talk to you, and I look forward to getting to know you guys better through the chat.
Thank you so much. Excited to have you here. You're kind of the cool kid, right? You knew about it well before it was popular and cool. And of course, we wouldn't be here today without the League for Innovation in Community College. So I want to pass the microphone to Cynthia from the League to say hello, introduce herself, and then just say a few words before we kick off.
Kelsey, thank you so much. Again, as always, we're so appreciative of this partnership, and you kind of helping put together, and you actually do put together these roundups and other webinars that we do with you guys. In this particular one, we're very excited to have Ellis with us because we are responding to what you've asked for, which is what about AI and online learning? So I'm very excited to kind of watch Kelsey pick Ellis's brain and watch all of you do the same. So please, ask your questions and engage in the conversation. And we look forward to it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. Yeah, and we'll dive into these different topics today. We'll start by talking about some AI in the news and some considerations as we're using AI in the classroom, and then we'll really pivot to talk about some considerations in the online learning space and kind of this intersection between generative AI and online learning. But I think an important note is that whether your classroom is online, in person, hybrid, in a spaceship, what all of this has in common is good quality pedagogy. So even if you don't teach an online class, hopefully there's something and a lot of things for you to learn today. And Ellis, I see you nodding, so I'm assuming you agree with me on that one. So we'll go ahead and get started. I read this story yesterday, and the first thought I had reading this was we have to talk about it. There is a standardized test called PISA. It's online it's international student assessment. So I don't know exactly the context in which students are taking this, but it's meant to assess the critical thinking skills within mathematics, reading and writing for, I think, specifically students age 15. and read yesterday that this standardized assessment will be incorporating AI into a couple of different portions of the assessment. But the one that was talked about the most was that there will be a chatbot that students can use during the assessment, so that the test could focus on their thinking capability, not whether they possess the background knowledge of a particular subject. And this line actually stood out to me the most, which was from someone from PISA, which was, I think, one of the greatest mistakes that we have made in the history of education is to divorce learning from assessment. So I've never actually been beholden to standardized testing as an educator, which is wild. I guess I was via the AP test, which, was par for course. But yeah, Ellis, wanted to hear your thoughts on this particular integration of AI in assessment. It wasn't what I was expecting.
Yeah, this one's very interesting. And I think we're going to see more, especially with big standardized tests, them trying to make it more accessible for the learner and take away some of that fear for standardized testing. Right now, a lot of the conversation revolving around standardized testing, especially since COVID, is it evaluating students at the level it should be evaluating them at? How do we know for sure that they are learning this material? How do we know that we're confident in this when we have other sources like a GPA and other channels that don't always line up with these standardized tests? So I do think it's interesting that this would give them more focus on the actual knowledge that they possess and not have to worry so much about the details of it. But what I think is most important from this is the quote at the bottom, where we have in the past tried to limit what students are able to do because of fear or the technology usually. And I think we are at the age now where we need to empower students and make it so that they can perform at the best level possible with the technological tools they have at their disposal. So we'll talk a good bit about that throughout this presentation, but this is definitely an interesting start, and it's interesting to see how different companies and organizations are starting to already incorporate AI to make things easier for their students.
Yeah. And I think something I've heard constantly over the last year is this thought of, well, how do we remove AI, the chatbot, GPT from the assessment? This is a really great case study for a lot of educators who are scratching their heads, instructional designers, district leaders who are scratching their heads at, like, how do I assess without AI? And this is now an alternative path, which is, how do I assess knowing that AI is going to be ever present? So
Absolutely.
apologies, doorbell. My dog may bark. Next question, and then I'll mute myself so that my dog doesn't bark throughout this entire answer, is the other piece of this implementation of AI is that they're going to be incorporating AI into the grading aspect of the assessment. So wanted to just get your thought on how we can responsibly incorporate AI into the grading experience and what considerations we should have and kind of where we should be drawing lines when it comes to AI assessing student work.
Absolutely. So I think with having AI incorporated into grading, it's a great resource for faculty. But I think when we talk about that, people think that the AI system is doing all the work for you, and that is not the case. You build the criteria that it's reviewing based off of, and then there's still that human component that you have to review once the AI system reviews it and gives you a score. So for example, you can give set criteria, grammar, word count, things like that, where an AI system can review it for you, so you don't have to worry about it. And then you can even have a content section where you're like, this is the content I'm looking for. However, it won't give a default score for that most of the time, because that's where your personal opinion has to come in. You have to be the one to grade the actual content. But these systems are going to eliminate a lot of the additional grading components that you would have to normally do and simplify it so you're not using as much time as you would previously with your grading. And I think that once instructors get the capability to access systems like that and play around with them, they will be much more confident in what they do and how they can benefit them with their grading.
Yeah, I love that. And I think too, I've definitely run into or read stories of, instructor just putting an entire essay in GPT and being like, grade this. And it's like, that's not the implementation approach we want, but it's the same way of, like, you would never just pull a random untrained TA and ask them to start grading your papers. You have to set expectations. You need to make sure that the TA is the right person for this job. You need to give them a rubric. So it's it's really maybe AI is the new TA.
Yes. Well, that's a great way to put it too, because
Yeah.
it can't do anything without you. It really can't. It
Mhm.
needs you to be able to filter by the criteria. It needs your prompt engineering when you're using a chat system, which is what you type into that chat box is prompt engineering. So you're creating that prompt to get your output. So no matter what you do, there is still that personal connection and impact you're having with the system because it can't do anything without you.
Yep. Yep. What I just heard is that we're all engineers. So thank you, my God. I'm
Yeah.
proud of me. I'm an
When they
engineer
said,
now.
when I found out it was called prompt engineering, I was like, yeah, that's a good catchphrase for it because I am not an engineer at all, but I'll take it.
We're all making our parents proud. Some of us were supposed to be engineers in the our alternative path. Uh, and then, pivoting away, I love that. And I think we're going to come back to a lot of the principles and topics related to that news story, but wanted to first chat a little bit about student perspectives before we talk about online learning, because I think at the end of the day, what we always need to recenter around is what is the purpose of education and what is our roles in this space. Um, and that is to motivate students to make sure that they're learning, not just the content, but skills, right? And at the end of the day, if we're making any decision without considering how does my student feel, how my student react to this, how am I setting up my student for success, is not an informed decision, right? So want to just touch base a little bit on this topic of, how do we incorporate students into the AI fold, for lack of a better question? So for just some, context and statistics, over 60% of students are in favor of using generative AI to support their learning and not replace it. So we have to remember the majority of students and the majority of people want to do good, right? And they want to learn. They don't want to feel like they're incompetent or lack the skills to do something. So assume the best, I suppose. 56% of students surveyed have used AI to help them complete assignments, not do the assignment for them. And majority of students don't want to use AI to cheat. They want to use it to grow and learn in their discipline. So again, just kind of setting the tone that we can assume the best from our student, and then also put in small expectations, boundaries for the students who maybe aren't going to always do the best. So want to just hear from you, Ellis, as somebody who's been in the space forever and has been an instructional designer and been, is that way forever? But you have been this, especially compared to me, right? I was in it for like 4 years and I said, gotta go work at Packback real quick. But how can we thoughtfully and practically incorporate student feedback and their considerations, their experience, their sentiments into AI teaching and learning implementation?
Yeah, so I think with any conversations revolving AI, we just have to be open to the conversation to start off with. I know that anything that is fearful or unknown, especially with AI, with what we had before it even became something big, the preconceived concept of it, we have to take that, learn the system, and then conquer it so that we can help our students to the best of our abilities. And if we know our students are using the technology, we need to be comfortable with using it so that we can help them advance in their own careers. I love to use the internet revolution of the 90s because if you look at quotes that were coming up when the internet was becoming big, there's a lot of conversations that are happening that we are having right now. It's a repeat with a different system, just it's another more advanced version of the internet. So you'll see a lot of these conversations about plagiarism, cheating. There was also a big uptick of that in the 90s where more students were using it incorrectly. So it was falling in the wrong area. We have that same thing with AI right now where students are still learning how to use it effectively and correctly. And we can understand that because most of us are trying to learn how to use it effectively and correctly too. So when you do have students who are plagiarizing with generative AI, it's important to talk about it and have those conversations, see where they're coming from, see where their misconceptions were, and really connect with them on that level. Incorporating it successfully, I think it's always great to use generative AI wherever you feel like you are lacking or can improve. I had an example where it said, well, isn't going to make our students lazier? No, it's going to make your students more efficient because they're able to work with the technology successfully and they have access to so much more information. They can do stuff so much more efficiently. So same thing with incorporating student feedback. Listen to what they're saying and why they're using it. And then you might be able to learn some of that from them and use it to better evaluate and update your courses in the future. Because if you see your students are using it, try to figure out ways where you can do scaffolding learning or interactive activities to where you can have some of those AI elements in your actual course. So you're teaching them how to use it effectively. And that'll go a long way.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And I just thought of the silliest little thing, like analogy for this. So recently, I don't know why, I've been watching a lot of medical shows, like documentary style medical shows. It's been comforting, I suppose. But I've been going down this rabbit hole of robot surgeries, right? Where the surgeon kind of puts their arms into a little robot and then they, drive the robot. And we're incorporating this really high tech technology into the surgical process. Does it make the surgeon more lazy because they're using a really precise tool that they have to be trained to use?
Yep.
And that makes them more accurate, makes the surgery safer. So it's kind of like we assume that the tool is going to make the student lazy instead of we don't look at that and think, oh, my student's about to learn a ton of new information and now be better as a result.
Yes,
So
and I'm stealing that. So just so you know, if you see another recording and I'm using that analogy, just know.
Robot surgeon. ChatGPT is the new robot surgeon for students. I love it. Yeah, I don't know. I've been going down a lot of deep medical rabbit holes.
That is a great example. You have access to a higher level technology, so you're able to perform your job at a higher level. And that's what we want our students to be able to do. When we send them into the workforce, we want them to be as proficient as possible. So why not teach them how to use this technology that we know everybody's talking about and make them a very viable candidate in their field? Great example.
Absolutely. And guess what? It's a whole new industry now.
It is.
Somebody's got to design and create these, robot surgeons, and then someone's got to train the surgeons how to use the robots, right? So it's going to change. It's going to change the world, but that also means it's going to create new along the way. And if we don't talk to our students about it, they're not going to be prepared for the future that is ChatGPT robot surgeons.
Yep.
So that's let's now use that analogy from.
Yeah.
Like, I used to teach chemistry to, high schoolers. So you just have to get really used to using analogies constantly because they do not understand what an atom is. It's just an uphill battle. So we're going to pivot a bit into the specific topic of today, which is online learning. So before we talk about online learning specifically, I want to just release a quick poll to get an idea of the folks in attendance today. Do you teach a class that is fully online or of a hybrid modality? Okay, if it's synchronous, asynchronous, just is there an online component to your course? Maybe you have. I think we all kind of were forced to teach online in COVID. And then do you think it's harder to prevent misuse of generative AI in an online course setting compared to an in-person course? And this is the sentiment I've received over the last year hanging out in this space. So I want to just get an idea of where we are. And Alice, so I'm also intrigued to hear, I haven't asked you this. You were already in the online learning space before COVID. So was COVID just the busiest time of your entire life?
It was. So yes. We were also in the process of launching several online programs during COVID. So not only I was launching 3 online programs all together, but I had to transition all of our courses from face-to-face to online. And it was a wild time and very difficult to do. But if I would have had generative AI and the features that are built in now, it would have been so much easier. So I can already see as my career progresses areas that took me much longer before generative AI that now I'm like, if I had this during COVID, it would have changed the game.
Yep. I think too, like I started appreciating writing for fun and as a creative outlet and as like a way to express myself very late in life. And that happens when you love chemistry and you just like, doing mathematical and chemical equations with your life. And I often think if I had GPT earlier in life to help me get started, I think I would have probably enjoyed the process much more. Now I feel like it's gotten a lot easier for me to write. I'm not having GPT write for me. I like my voice and I like my specific flavor of spice in my writing, but I do like getting a little bit of scaffolding from GPT, especially if I don't know how to end something, I don't know how to start something, I don't know how to title something. I don't know if you have ever felt the same way. You're a writer. Yeah.
Yep. That's like, so I'm writing a book right now, and sometimes just when you need general character descriptions, like it's still my voice, but for background characters, I don't necessarily have a preference on how they're perceived. So I'll get it to make me some background character description. So that way it gives me that layer and it helps me with my visualization going forward. But it's a great brainstorming companion. It really is.
It's a buddy. It's a buddy that's always awake.
And I also saw
answer.
I saw in the chat, Paul said he is an LMS system administrator as well. And the first year of COVID was the busiest of his entire life. And he's a former Marine. So that's saying something.
I can only imagine.
It,
Well,
for
thanks so
anybody who is an LMS administrator, I know you went through craziness. So I am with you.
on that train with them. Well, thanks so much for answers in the chat. It looks like we have a nice heavy mix of folks who definitely have online learning experience. Some folks who don't might in the future. So we'll try to make sure we bring everything back to just good old fashioned high quality pedagogy at the end of the day. So Alice, this is your area of expertise. I've actually never taught an online course before. And I don't even think have taken an online course. Maybe I have. I'll have to think about this one. Like more of like a supplemental learning course, I think I've taken online versus a core class. So yeah, want to just ask you right off the bat, what are the major considerations and principles when we are thinking of online learning, online assessment, online facilitation, and what are the things that we have to be particularly mindful of that might differ from, let's say, in-person settings?
Yeah. So when you're doing any kind of course development, there's tons of frameworks you can follow. I'm sure most of you on this conversation are familiar with those frameworks. All of them have very similar principles. So no matter what framework you pick, you're going to see some similarities across them. And one that I always tell my faculty and my instructional designers to consider is the learner. I think no matter what framework you use, always considering your learner is the best way to start, because if you know who your student population is and how they prefer to learn, it's going to help you tremendously in your overall course design. I think the visual identity of your course is also highly important. Navigation, organization, workflow, that helps your student because their questions are going to be more impactful questions based on the content rather than the navigation. If you are getting questions regarding course navigation, then you need to meet with an instructional designer to review your course to see how it can be the best layout possible so that your students aren't asking that question. And when they're connecting with you, it's meaningful on the actual content. There's others that you can do. The other thing I just really want to mention, because I know we're limited on time, evaluating your course. Oftentimes we will do a course development and say, man, I have a great course. I'm ready to go. Use that course shell for 5 years and just keep using it. Always remember that you should take feedback and evaluate your course, if not from semester to semester, from year to year, just to make sure that you're keeping up to date with the ever evolving technologies and that you're staying fresh on content, organization, and who your learners are. And you'll get feedback usually through sets, observations, and things like that you can use to constantly improve your course as well.
Yeah, and I think really for any course, any assessment, feedback and iteration is such an important piece of it.
It is. And it's something that I think we don't take advantage of enough. And that's because sometimes, I know for me, it's hard to see negative feedback on a course and you're like, no. But we have to listen to our constituents and our learners and make sure that we're connecting with them. If it's one voice, we could see and connect and see if there was something just with that person. But if you've seen it's a recurring thing, it's something that does need to be evaluated and updated. And I really encourage you to try to use that feedback as much as possible.
It's good for you. It's the feedback is the soup of the soul, soup of the.
Yeah.
I had my one win on the analogy today and I'm out.
Hey, good. You did it.
And this is just one example of some instructional design principles for remote teaching and online learning. And one thing that you said when we were chatting earlier today was, online and instruction, or online and in-person learning aren't equal. Can you share a little bit more of that thought of what you told me? Because it like itched a part of my brain that really made sense.
Oh yeah, so everybody's like online learning and face-to-face have to be equal. They don't have to be equal, they have to be equitable. They have to still meet the same criteria, but you can change the course shell to meet your new demographic. So you still want to have a very similar course that's to your face-to-face course, but it's a different set of learners. It's a different modality. You are going to have to make changes that will change the navigation of your course, change some of the assignments minorly, but it's still going to be a very similar experience, and they're still going to still get those same learning outcomes. So even though it's not an equal experience, it is an equitable experience.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
Thanks.
So getting to, some of the concerns that online educators have, or
Yes.
educators who facilitate online learning, it's that I'm not going to be able to preserve critical thinking in my student experience, especially when it comes to assessment, because now they have generative AI and it could just do everything for them. So I wanted to hear your thoughts, as someone who specializes in this area. How do we preserve critical thinking in the online learning setting, regardless of what new robot comes into play in the future?
So I know one of the biggest things is papers right now. Everybody's talking about students are just going to cheat on their papers and use generative AI to write their papers. Most of the time, I have that happen here, so don't get me wrong, it does happen. Most of the time, when you're reading through the papers, it's very easy to identify if generative AI was used, because generative AI is not meant to write an MLA, APA, Chicago. It's not meant to have that critical thinking skill. So making sure that you're using active learning and making sure they're applying stuff directly learned in the course is one way to go about it. With papers, you can also do flip learning, where if it's a face-to-face class, you have them start writing the paper in class, or have them start with ChatGPT and start to improve on that paper. So have them do their first draft in ChatGPT and say, this would fail you if you were in your final draft, but let's take what you know and what we've taught you in this class and improve it and expand on it to make it a well-written paper. And they will cut the vast majority of what came through ChatGPT and write in their own voice, but it shows them the correct way to kind of use that system, and how it's not necessarily great for pulling papers. We've started to do that in our English 101 and 102 course, and that has reduced the number of cheating incidences we've had, because students are like, wow, I would really fail this essay if I tried to write it this way. So having students experience that and see that and know what the expectation of the faculty member is huge. I also think making sure you're doing interactive quizzes, discussions, case studies, scenarios, those things go a long way, because if you use real world scenarios, the students are more likely to relate to their own individual experiences and not want to rely on another system. And if they are relying on another system, it's going to be for clarification, brainstorming, or checking grammar and clarity, because they want their own voice in those kind of activities. Scaffolding learning is another huge way to prevent it. If you have somebody writing an essay, do it throughout the course. Have them submit multiple drafts so that you can verify that they're writing it on their own. You can use AI detectors. I usually say AI detectors are not going to be your most accurate source for any kind of AI detection, because they can't keep up with the advancements that the systems are making. So you're going to get some false positives, and you're also going to get some false negatives. There's also issues with students with hidden disabilities, or disabilities where they will get flagged when other students won't. So I saw somebody say, what are AI detectors? Those are systems like SafeAssign has some AI detectors. Turnitin has some AI detectors. There's Zero GPT, which is an AI detector, and all of those are helpful in small portions, but when you're doing it for a full essay, you can use it as a resource to evaluate the grading, but don't rely on it fully. Have those conversations with the students, see where they came from, and don't just jump in with plagiarism right away. That's my biggest advice, is have those conversations. And then focus on collaborative learning. The more times you can get your students working with each other, they're not going to want to cheat as a group. So they will produce more genuine work. And keep your feedback going. Keep giving them feedback that puts them on the path that you want them to be on, and make them do reflections on their own work when things go wrong and say, why did this go wrong? How can we improve on this? And give them that feedback as an instructor, and it will go a long way.
Alice, that is the first time I've heard students don't want to cheat in a group, and it's genius. Like, I had not heard that before, and I hadn't even thought about it as like, you have this really high stakes project that you really don't want students to, act funny about, and you just have them do it as a group, because we can rely on like one student per group to keep it above board.
Oh, absolutely. And plus, if you're like, well, we're doing papers, there's so many papers that we write in academia where there's multiple authors on it. You can do papers with 3 different authors and see how your students work with that and how they expand, and just make sure there's some kind of evaluation on that, so we can evaluate each student individually for the amount of work they put in. But I think that's been one of the biggest successes, because students don't want to cheat in groups.
Yep. I absolutely love that. And I want to pivot here a little bit, but also double click on something you said, which was real life scenarios. I know something that's been quite popular to chat about, and I'll share later, over the past few months, has been this concept of authentic assessment, which is, if we have these types of assessments that focus so much about the learning process versus the final, product, that are collaborative, that, the way that I think about authentic assessment, it's the type of paper that, as an educator, you don't mind grading 40 in a row because they don't all sound the same.
Yep.
And as a student, they're the type of papers that either you look at and you go, oh, this is gonna be fun, like, I'm excited to do this assignment, or, oh wow, there's no need for me to use AI because I have all the tools that I need. So yeah, I don't know if you've chatted a bunch with your faculty or staff about authentic assessment, or what your suggestions are there, or your own personal opinions.
So I always try to say, make it as beneficial to the student as possible with any assessment. The more they feel like they have that knowledge and skill set to do it themselves, the better they will be in the long run. And also, when we're building our assessments, I think options are always beneficial. So not for everything, but sometimes with assessments, if you give students multiple options, they're more likely to pick an option that they relate to and that they know they will be successful at. So if you're doing papers, give them multiple topics to choose from. If you're doing a project, give them a few different areas to choose between. And you're going to get more authentic coursework, because it's something the student was able to have some buy-in into, and they had that connection to the assignment. So they're like, I'm going to do better on this because I chose this option than the other 3 I wouldn't do well at. So just make sure that your students have some choice in your course as well. And like this article says, I think that we're going to start seeing tons of jobs where they are looking for people who are proficient in generative AI and can come in and make office spaces more efficient. So I think that's something in the workforce that we're going to start seeing within the next few years, if not sooner.
And I love that you brought up autonomy, because it's one of my core principles of education and just life too.
Yep.
I manage a large team. It's like, how can I make autonomy a core experience? Because it's a pillar of motivation, right? Is letting
it is.
choose what they want to do versus being forced. And sometimes in teaching, the student has to read that chapter, right? So, but if they have to do something in order to acquire the correct amount of knowledge or the correct skill, how can we also just incorporate autonomy into it at some point along the way? So I love that you brought that up. Thank you. Now, thinking of AI, I agree that in the future, careers are going to be very dependent on student collaboration and just human collaboration with AI. So we have a responsibility as educators to make sure that AI, we're talking to students about AI minimum, if not teaching them how to use it, incorporating it in the classroom. But the reality is, whether we like it or not, AI is knocking on our door, right? It's going to be incorporated into all the apps we use. our workflows, our jobs, our lives. It already is in
Yep.
many ways. I use Uber all the time. Uber and AI have been friends for a while now.
Yep.
So want to hear from you a little bit, how can educators and students leverage AI in online courses? And by the way, I'm sure this can work for really any course, but if you want to put a special spin on it for online, go for it. But if it works for all, it works for all.
So I think the best way to do it is especially if you're going to use any form of AI in your course, is to be upfront with your students that it's being utilized in the course. And if you're expecting them to utilize it in the course, show examples of how you want it to be done. So I often have in my courses, I teach an Excel course here on campus. And for our test, I give them a study guide, say run the study guide through an AI system, ChatGPT or Copilot, and use it as a study companion. So I give them a prompt. I say, hey, can you help me study? They type it into the chat system. It says, sure, can you give me the criteria that you want to study? They upload the study guide, and then it questions them back and forth, gives them some sample answers, and they're able to learn with a tutor pretty much on the situation for what they're doing. And that's a great way to do it. That's low impact to your course, but major impact to your student. Also, if you give them examples of like when you finish your paper, you can upload it through an AI system, say, please check this for grammar clarity, and anywhere I can expand, and it will give you suggestions to improve your writing while still being genuine and true to your tone. Do you have to use it? No, you don't have to. But does it help sometimes? Absolutely. It's another system to help you get another set of eyes on your work, just like it would be for a tutor. So integrating things like that on the student end, highly beneficial because we're teaching them the right way to use it. And we're getting them to work with making prompts. On the instructor side, depending on the systems you're utilizing, like we talked about, it can help you with some grading. It can help you with feedback. If you're not exactly sure how you want to word your feedback, you can run it through a system and say, hey, can you help me reword this? And it will give you different outcomes. Emailing your students. If you have issues where you're like, I need to talk to the student about this, but I'm not sure how to word it, you can run it through a AI system and get it to word it in a way that you feel comfortable with. So there's a lot of ways you can play with it. If you use a LMS that has AI features enabled, you can use it to help you generate discussion boards, assessments, test questions, rubrics. Rubrics are my favorite. I don't like making rubrics, but having generative AI give me a base to start with it allows me to have more detailed rubrics that directly relate to the assessment. So as an educator, the limits are almost endless because the LMS systems are starting to realize the importance of it and are integrating it for you. So there's not a ton you have to do as the instructor to start leveraging them if your institution has those features turned on.
Yeah. And I think too, it's such a wonderful opportunity for us to just show students how to use it. So I'm thinking of, I'm an educator. I'm going to use generative AI to give me a draft of a rubric. I'm not going to put it in front of my students until I review it, make edits. And once I put it in front of students, I could say, hey, I used GPT to create a draft of this rubric, and this is what I did to change it. You could just model for your students exactly what you want them to do. And it's giving us that opportunity. So I love that. The other thing you said that I loved was giving students feedback. We could use AI for feedback. And I think, my teaching experience was that I was, I studied chemistry and then I was teaching chemistry. My students had to write. I wasn't a confident writer. I didn't have an English degree. I didn't know many grammatical principles. What I do is I read what I write out loud, and if it sounds good, it's getting written. You know what I mean? That's my interaction with grammar. So I didn't feel confident actually giving students grammar feedback. I only really felt confident giving them feedback on the content of what they were writing. So I think the other beauty in this is that AI can help support educators where they feel less confident and maybe don't have the time or energy to become the best grammar coach in the entire world.
Oh, absolutely.
My experience, I don't know if you've run into that with your faculty.
Oh, absolutely. So we have, for specifically our nursing program, they want to focus on content. They don't care as much for grammar. So they're like, I know it's important, but we didn't teach these students English 101 and 102 on our campus. They transferred in. We need to know that they know their nursing content. So we have a system where they can go in, write their assignments in that system, have AI assist them, kind of like what Grammarly does, and make sure that they're writing to the best of their ability. And then they get that submitted. So that helps us a ton, because then the instructors are reading based on what the student actually knows and not what they're struggling to expand on. And if we do have students who are still struggling with writing, we do connect them to various resources, because we want them to be the best version of themselves, but we don't want to hold them back in the course for a skill that they should have got way earlier in their educational career. That's no fault to our institution or the student.
I love that. Yeah, I think there's just so much good that can come out of the incorporation of AI. We just need to make sure that we're ready to use it, right? And we understand and we have good, principles and considerations as we're incorporating AI. So I pulled in some examples of authentic assessment. I should have showed this earlier, but you've chatted about this, really when we're thinking of strengthening our courses, whether they're online or in person, this is what it comes back to. And even thinking back to the first thing we talked about, the PISA assessment, it's giving them an assessment that is so heavily focused on the process of learning that there's a chatbot in the assessment. So it's like, if a student understands what a word means or what it means in a context, they just ask the chatbot.
Yep.
And that's a great mindset. Now, it takes time and energy to get there. So a lot of advice I've given educators is like, don't try to overdo it and like today and overhaul your entire course. If you have assessments that are working that might be not 100% GPT proof, it's okay. Like let that one slide, focus on like one day, one thing at a time. I'd be curious to hear, Alice, any advice you'd give educators who want to start incorporating change, but might feel overwhelmed, or they don't have the resources to start, or they feel like just that first step forward is a little intimidating.
Oh, it is. I know it is for sure. So especially because the system can be so overwhelming. So the thing is, make an account with one of these systems. I recommend Copilot or ChatGPT. Copilot is probably my favorite right now, which is different than what I would have said last year. But create these accounts, play around with them, and see how you can use them to better yourself, your course. Just have a little conversation with the system, see how it thinks, it works. It's a chat bot, so you can just talk with it at first, ask random silly questions, make it generate some fun, goofy images, just get a handle on it, and then start saying, well, can you help me update this assessment? Post your assessment in there. Say, I want to make these key changes, and it will give you an output that uses your original assessment, but makes those minor edits for you. So, and it's a great brainstorming companion. So use it to brainstorm and play around and really just get in there with the system on the ground level so that you can understand it the way your students understand it, and it'll go a long way. Copilot, the funnest thing about that is, like you said, how they're starting to integrate these little help buttons for generative AI or AI where they can ask questions. It makes me think back to Clippy from the Microsoft days.
Yes.
Because Copilot now has a desktop application where you click it, it just pops up in your right menu column, and you can start using it while you're doing your other tasks. So they're trying to make it as accessible to users as possible. And it's not going to replace you or your students. It's just going to enrich what you do.
I love that. Also, Clippy. GPT is just
Clippy.
Clippy.
Yep,
Like
that's
a
what I think every
really
time.
buff Clippy is what GPT is.
Clippy has evolved.
Yeah, that's absolutely incredible. And you and I were even chatting about this a few weeks ago of when you do have faculty potentially use Packback, you have them try it first themselves.
Yes.
So use the technology before you put it in front of your students. Make sure you're comfortable with it. Then all of a sudden you start to see the benefits. You also start to see where maybe some of the weaknesses are, helps inform how you put it in front of students, but it increases your confidence as you're putting it in front of students.
I think that for instructors, if you're able to experience the technology at the same end as your student, it's going to help you tremendously. So what we do is we enroll our instructors into a course that helps them with course development, and they get to experience a lot of the systems as a student. So they get to really experience the benefits that our students get from them. And that goes a long way with the confidence of the instructor when helping the student in the future.
I love that. I love that. That's why I force everyone at my company to use the technology we have, because you have to understand the end user experience.
Yep.
It's required. So I know we have a few minutes left for some Q&A. I saw one question come up earlier that I'd love to ask you, so I need to go find it in the chat.
Yeah.
But if anybody has any questions, feel free to throw them in the Q&A feature. But this question came up earlier, which is, with models being trained on data sets biased towards English native speakers, how can we ensure that we're being culturally and linguistically sensitive, especially for our international students? So not sure how you've addressed this in your own implementation of AI.
So we don't have a ton of secondary English speaker population here. So I'm not the best person to speak on that. I know when you have people who are not native English speakers, sometimes in their writing, it's very different. So when they're writing, they are one of those populations as well that might get flagged under generative AI detectors. So that's something just to be cautious about. GPT-0 is one specifically where if English is not their primary language, they're going to get flagged a lot for using generative AI. And some of those students may be using AI to help them with translations. So that's also something to consider, where they might not have used it to write the paper, but they didn't know what this word was. So now they're getting the translation instead of using Google Translate or something. Now they're using generative AI. So just being cautious of how your students are using the system, especially with those populations, is very important.
Yep. And the limited interaction I have had with students accessing generative AI who, English is their second, third, fourth language, has been, it's helpful. I'm a newer student in America and I have to read Beowulf.
Yep.
I can hardly read Beowulf.
Yep.
And I only know English. That's the only language I know. And being able to take a passage and say, "Okay, can you give this to me in plain terms?" Or start, bringing it down into more common language. Again, because when you're learning a new language, you don't learn the most complex terms, right? You're kind of starting small and scaffolding up. So I've heard how GPT can be helpful. I think at the same time, with any generative AI system that's trained on a data set, there's always going to be a risk that we're giving students information that's biased, inaccurate, who knows?
Yeah.
There data privacy concerns to be having. So I think it's important, as we are using generative AI in the classroom, to also let our students know the inherent risks that we're accepting by using this technology. But the solution, I don't think, is to not use the technology.
Oh, agreed. And data privacy is a great point too, because some of these systems aren't great with the data privacy. Copilot, though, if you do sign in with your organization's email, it is protected and secured. So if you use that system and you're logged in with your institutional information through Microsoft, it will secure that data for you. So that's very good. And that's one of the reasons they've become one of the preferred generative AI users.
Yep, absolutely. That makes sense. We got a good question here. You mentioned a course development class. Is this a class that I could take, or there a suggestion on how to get better with the technology?
Yeah, so I don't have it open for anybody outside of my institution. We do a remote teaching certification, which prepares our faculty for teaching online. And then we do a quality course development course where we work with the instructor to build their course out through a 5-week course. And those are both just internal courses. But if you are interested in using generative AI, there's tons and tons of resources out there to getting started. YouTube has phenomenal getting started guides. And if you read through some articles on what you can use generative AI for, you'll find your niche in it and what you really want to use it for. And that's where I would start. Start with a very narrow vision field and figure what you want to do with the system the most and become decent at that, almost proficient, and then begin to expand beyond that. If you go into the system and try to get it to do everything for you at once, it's going to overwhelm you. So just start with some basic conversations, create an account, ask for some silly images. Like I said, those are the best ways to get started. And I will see if I can find a resource for you guys on getting started with generative AI too and post it.
And if you go to the Packback website, it's just packback.co, there should be an AI training center.
Oh,
And some of the, yeah, and some, it's all free, so don't worry, everyone, and accessible, but there should be links to other resources in there. Like I know, Ethan Mollick has created a free course, for kind of prompt engineering, how educators can be using AI. AI for Education is a really popular organization that creates guides and, workshops, webinars, things like that. So there are like, it's almost like there's too many resources. Like, how do I know which ones are the right ones to grab? And then something else you had told me about is, if folks are really struggling with, uh, let's say their assessment quality or how to navigate their assessments, it's like talk to an instructional designer. So it's almost like
yes.
make sure you understand the resources you have on campus. And if you're not using them, use them.
Yes, absolutely. And we don't anticipate instructors becoming proficient with AI. I think instructional design is one of the fields where people are going to be expected to be proficient with generative AI. So use your instructional designers to the best of their abilities. And if they don't know, usually they will be able to ask those questions or find those resources for you. Two heads is always better than one. So utilize the resources you have available to you on your institution.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Ooh, we got a good question in the chat. How do we make terms of service more accessible and readable for students and faculty to understand the privacy, intellectual property, and citation requirements? I have been putting things like this into GPT, saying, summarize it and teach it to me like I'm a 5. And it does a really great job at breaking it down. But I do realize some of the irony in that. So yeah, Alice, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Not much. So I will say this does have me think about your. I don't have a great answer for you, first off, but with academic institutions, with your academic integrity policy, I think it's important to start having conversations about how generative AI can be played in and including your own verbiage in there. So because we say plagiarism a lot with generative AI and it's not exactly the same. So having guidelines that your institution makes is very helpful because students will probably read that more likely than anywhere else. So having something, and that could be in your syllabus, that can be, it depends on how your institution wants to set it up. I'm leaning towards academic integrity policy for our institution because that's something where it seems to fall under a lot. So we're just putting our own verbiage there that lets students know what is involved when they're using it, how they should use it effectively, and what happens if they misuse the system. I hope that helps somewhat.
I think too, these terms of services on some of these technologies have become
They're so long.
so long,
So
so
long.
to understand. And you're like, am I going to go to jail if I sneeze too loud? Like what's happening here? What do I actually need to know from this policy?
Yeah,
So
that's what I tried to pull the most condensed version of what the system expects out of you and what you're agreeing to, but it's so long for some of them that nobody's going to read through all of it.
Yep. So you can use generative AI to summarize it. I do that. When I'm reading something that's particularly dense that I'm having a hard time understanding, I'll just say, hey, can you do a job can you break this down for me? And
Yep.
sometimes I'll say I'm in middle school or like I'm in elementary school and it will like change the language and it's
Absolutely.
adjustable. It works. Well, I don't know if there are any other questions that we can answer. I don't know, Alice, if you do have a particular AI for math learning tool that you'd recommend or implementation. I actually don't think I know any AI math tools right
Go
now.
to Magic School AI, and that's probably going to be your best resource. So Magic School AI it takes away the prompt engineering, and I'll post a link to it for you guys. What it does is it's more like a form you fill out, and it produces content for you based on select criteria. And there is specific math. Let me go into mine to make sure that this one, it'll do like a report card comic, rubric generation, student work feedback, text summarizer, and math spiral review. I don't know what that is, but there is math stuff in here that you can utilize. And it's very specific to subjects. So like there's science labs in here. So this one's geared towards educators. So I would really check it out. It's a lot of fun to play with.
Great, thank you. I had no idea that existed. So
It's
today,
very fun. They use very similar AI systems. They just take away the engineering part and build it into a forum for you. So it asks you the
Yeah.
specific questions instead of you having to come up with it on your own.
Okay, that's incredible. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for taking the time to join Alice and I and talk about things we love, which is AI, learning, teaching, a lot of other things. Going down rabbit holes about robot surgeons.
Yeah.
If you're curious to learn more about Packback's instructional AI, feel free to email curious@packback.co. I know we didn't talk about Packback today. That's one of my rules of life, is don't talk about Packback during these these webinars, but that is how Ellis and I became acquainted. So email curious if you're curious to learn more. And then we do have an ongoing survey that we're conducting amongst faculty, staff, administrators across all stakeholders in education from K-12 to higher ed to understand more about policy development, as we're trying to create more robust and efficient and precise resources around AI policy. So you'll likely get that in a follow-up email unless Peter has already put it in the chat. Peter, that was maybe a plug for you to put in the chat. Otherwise, you're going to get that via email. Right. And then part 2 of the presentation. So we do these monthly. So you can subscribe to get automatically added to the list every single month. Great. Well, Ellis, thank you so much for joining. This has been a topic that folks have been begging to hear about and discuss, which is online learning space. So thank you for sharing your expertise, because I don't have
Very
expertise
welcome.
in online learning. And it was so great to spend, some time with you today.
Oh, thank you guys for having me. And if you guys ever want to reach out, feel free to contact me, and I'm happy to talk to you guys more about generative AI and how it can benefit your faculty.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining. We'll see y'all in a month. Bye, everyone.